So if you look at the end of this week or the bottom of this week, you'll see a new assignment down there. It's not due for a little while. Remember, next week is a short week because of Labor Day. So Tuesday is a B day. I won't see you all again until Wednesday. We just have a 2-day A week and a 2-day B week next week. But we are going to try and finish up. We're very close to the end of our elements of art. Okay. One of the most loathed elements of art when it comes to drawing is space. Okay. Space has to do with perspective and how we have a sense of generally the amount of depth or space that something has within an artwork. Okay. So typically for something to feel 3D and realistic, you've got to feel like there's enough space for that object to fit meaningfully within a certain space. One of the most common ways that people do that is they create either 1, 2, 3, 4, or so on and so forth point perspective to help guide them. At some point in your life, you've probably done a perspective drawing before. There are a handful of you in this class that have had Art 1 with me, and we did perspective drawings way back in Art 1. Okay, if you don't know what I mean, I promise you, I will walk you through every bit of it, and it will make more sense. This is not the kind of thing that I will expect you to do all of the time, but I do think just getting a sense of how things are supposed to fade in the distance, get smaller, how the perspective changes depending on the angle is really important for you creating things that look more realistic overall. So space essentially, again, is just perspective. There are a lot of different easy ways to make things look like they have more space. Okay, part of space is creating an illusion that something is three-dimensional and that the things around it are three-dimensional and that they have a certain sort of mass to them, if that makes sense. So one of the easiest, most simplest ways you can make things look like they have perspective is simply overlapping them. If things genuinely look like they're sitting on top of each other, then you as a human being are going to know that something is in front of something else. And that creates a sense of there being depth in space. Shading is another super easy way. If things look like they're 3D to begin with, it's going to look like they actually take up space, like they're actually three-dimensional. The way you place things is very important. Okay, so the way that you scatter things out in a scene helps give a sense to any viewer how much area is in the actual scene. Size is also a big factor. Things that are further away should be smaller from a viewer's perspective than things that are closer to you. Okay, typically things that are closer to you, we put at the bottom of an image. They're considered the foreground near the bottom, and they take up the most space. Things that are further away tend to gravitate toward the top of a document or of an artboard, and they tend to be the smallest. Okay, focus is also another thing. Most of you probably have pretty good eyesight, but if you've ever really looked at things that are super far away, all of that distance does play with how well your eyes can focus on things that are really far away. Okay, part of that just has to do with the air between you and whatever that thing is, like mountains, way out in the distance. Things come between it that create a sort of clouded, foggy focus of things. Things that are really far away tend to be less detailed. Okay, and then what we're going to work on primarily is linear perspective. Okay, so following grid lines to create that illusion that things are actually receding into the distance. And I figure, like I said before, most of you have probably done something kind of like this. Maybe this is a little bit more detailed than what you've had to do. But how many of you have had to draw a road that shrinks into like a generic triangle in the background? Right. Okay. And last year, if you had this class with me, I'm pretty sure if you had it with Mr. Bryant previous years, we always did like a perspective where you had to write your name and we made it look like it was 3D perspective letters. Okay. It's usually not our best work, but it's the same principle. It's the same concept. Okay. So the way that these types of linear perspective drawings work are very simple. You have to have what's called a vanishing point. And vanishing points are where everything sort of disappears to, where everything recedes to in a picture. There are different types of so-called point perspectives. One point perspective is what we were just looking at. Everything disappears and evolves back to this one dot in the center of the road, and that's why everything sort of shrinks at that angle back that way. If you add in 2 points instead of just one, they will shrink in 2 different directions. Typically, 2-point perspective has a vanishing point on the left and a vanishing point on the right, and things slide toward both, and it gives them a slightly different effect. there is always something called the horizon line. The horizon line is where the sky meets the ground. Even if you can't see where the sky and the ground touch in your picture because there are buildings and things in the way, you have to have a horizon line to place your vanishing points. Okay, so that's how 2-point perspective works. What we're going to be doing is 3-point perspective. Okay, now you're not going to be drawing anything elaborate. You're not going to be drawing anything that has a million windows like what you see on the picture on the left, but we are going to use 3 different vanishing points like what you see on the right. And we're going to use that to create one of 2 angles. Okay, I want you to think about which one you want to do. You can either do something in 3-point perspective that looks like you are taller than the objects in the scene, like you're looking down on them from above, or you can do something that feels like you're looking up at them from below. But that's typically the general kind of option for 3-point perspective. But the idea is you've got 2 different vanishing points. 2 are on the horizon line, and typically a third one is at the very bottom edge of your paper. Now, if we were doing this with like pencil, you would need a ruler constantly to help you draw all these lines and make sure that things actually recede at the right angle. This is going to be an assignment where you have to be a little more technically precise. Okay, but remember, you have Photoshop, and Photoshop will make it easier. I am going to show you a way today to use a polygon tool to make a star that will build all these lines for you. You don't have to do any measuring. You don't even have to use the rulers, really. Okay? Beyond that, to make straight lines, remember to always use the shift command so that you can connect things really easily. It will make the entire process so much simpler on you. It's still complicated and chaotic, so I do promise we'll get into it more. But like I mentioned before, you can see these 2 pictures over on the right. Okay? The one on the far right, it's kind of like you're looking down from above, like on the tops of buildings. On the left here, it's like we're looking up from below. So you kind of have to decide, what do you want to do? Okay, I am going to have you draw 3D forms, so things like cubes. You could do maybe 1 or 2 spheres, but I would do things that have straight edges. So you could do triangles or pyramids. You could do rectangles. You can do different types of polygons. But I want you to think about, do you want to do it from below or above? Okay, because that's kind of the option. We're going to set up our document here in a second. If you think you want to do a perspective where you're looking up at the shapes, you're going to want to put your dot at the top of the paper. If you think you want to do it where the shapes are below you and you're looking down on them, you're going to want to put the dot at the bottom of your paper. Okay, and I know this is a lot, but here's like an overview of essentially what we're going to do. Okay, we are going to use these lines that we make to help you draw the rooftops or the tops of whatever your forms are, the sides of the walls, and to create a true perspective that actually looks realistic. Okay, now if you don't follow the grid that we make, they end up looking really wonky and I'm not gonna lie, like really terrible. It takes a little bit of patience to get it the first time, but once you kind of get it, it'll click and it'll work a lot easier. For most people, even though this seems tedious and like it has a lot of work built into it, this is the easiest way to ensure that your things actually look like they recede in the distance in a logical and like correct way. So it is something that even if you've not really done it before is very helpful in the long run. Okay? What we're going to do is we're going to set up a document that uses what we call the star thing effect. Okay, in Photoshop, you can create a series of stars. Each one of these dots you see on the screen are a star. You can make a star with the polygon tool. Kind of like how you can cheat with the star tool in Illustrator and make a triangle, you can use the polygon tool to make a star in Photoshop. And we're going to put 3 stars for your 3 different vanishing points, and they're automatically going to draw all these diagonal lines for you. The trick later will be deciding what you want to put where and what you want to draw inside that space. Okay, so we're going to quickly set this up. I will talk to you about the other... Actually, let's see. How are we doing on time? We got like 4 minutes. We won't set it up today. We'll set it up next class. But let me talk to you about the project details. Okay? I know a lot of you are kind of zoned down on me. Give me like 3 more minutes of your time. Okay? So here is what you're going to be asked to actually draw once we set the document up. Okay, you can create things that feel like floating houses or buildings, but essentially I'm just looking for 3D forms, things that are shapes. You can make them solid or hollow, like there's some in this example that are hollow and you can kind of see through, but you're going to use 3D perspective to place them. Okay, they need to be basic geometric shapes, no organic things, things that are easily made with straight lines. I would not recommend spheres. Every now and then somebody wants to throw one in for fun. Don't really do spheres. They're kind of complicated. Okay. Now, you do need to have at least 6 of those illusions of space that we talked about. So things need to overlap. You need to add a little bit of shading, which you can do with gradients, and we'll talk about that next time. Okay, you need to think about how you want to place things. Put some things higher on the document, like up at the top of the paper, some things lower. Think about different sizes, so make some things smaller, bigger. And you want to add some kind of value or detail. And we'll talk about that a little bit more too. That's typically very simple for geometric shapes because they have all those angles. Like take this rectangle right here over on the left. Typically because they have all these these flat planes. Each side is basically one color. There's not like a blended gradient on a lot of things. They're just slightly different color variations. Okay, but we will set up the reference lines. And I do want you to have no more than 5 colors. So you could pick whatever colors you would like, but 5 is the maximum. Things like what you see here, these are all hand-drawn examples, but these are great examples of the kind of thing that I'm looking for. Okay, so just shapes. If you want to make them feel more like a house, you can. You don't have to. They can just be weird, sort of MC Escher shapes. And we'll look at more examples next class as well. They can be tiny, they can be large. Think about mixing it up. Okay. But do think about using different types of shapes. Overall, it's going to make it feel a lot more interesting if it's not just squares and rectangles, but added in some other things. And again, we'll go over how to draw them and shade them, I promise. Now, for the sake of our last couple of minutes, I do want to show you some previous student examples. I will admit, I expect you all to do things that are more involved than these previous examples. These examples are not bad, but they're not necessarily as detailed as I'm hoping for us to do on our particular project. But you can see how some other people chose different colors and chose different shapes and how they chose to make some things feel like they were above or below or hollow or solid. And it's just a few different examples. Okay. All right, that took longer than I estimated. We have less than a minute. If you've still got a tablet, please put it up for me. If you still are logged in, please go ahead and log out. And we will start that document at the beginning of next class.